Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August RELO Andes webinar. I'm so excited to be here with you this afternoon. Today, we're talking all about engaging warm-ups for your everyday lessons in your English language classes. I'm excited to share this webinar with you and grateful for your support. Excited to see you joining live. As you know, we host these webinars on the third Thursday of each month. So as long as you're following on Facebook, you'll know when they're happening. I see so many joining from all over the world. Thanks for joining us. I see from Ayachucho, nice to see you. Hello. From Pakistan, nice to see you. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Make sure that you follow along on Facebook to get all the updates of what's happening. Greetings from Mexico. Thanks for being here. Hello. Good afternoon, or perhaps good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Maybe we have some good mornings out there. Thanks for joining. All the way from Egypt, welcome. So let's jump right into these warm-up activities. We're going to start with grounding ourselves in why it's important to warm up our students for class. The biggest first thing is that a warm-up engages your students. Imagine, think about that first few minutes of your class when students are coming in, getting settled, sitting down perhaps, even in a virtual space, they're getting connected, they're joining the space. We engage our students in a warm-up so that we awaken their minds. We get them centered for the day. Warm-ups can also build your classroom culture. It gives a little bit of transition in, a little grace for students to get focused. So it can be a piece that builds your culture and some community with your students. A warm-up can also set the tone for the day. So a warm-up could potentially be related to a topic that you're presenting to your students that day. Maybe it's a way for you to check their previous knowledge about something, to make connections to other things that you've been working on. Setting the tone for the day is a great way to use a warm-up. It focuses our students. Warm-ups usually happen just in the first 5 minutes of class. We don't take a lot of time for warm-ups. They should happen just for a short amount of time. This is often because warm-ups don't include teaching something new. It's a way to engage students in previous knowledge or a focus for the day. It also, in an English as a foreign language setting, gives some transition from the outside world to speaking English. So you teachers that teach in communities where your students are speaking their native language that's not English outside of your classroom, a warm-up gives some space for a student to turn off their one language brain and transition to their English speaking brain. Now, before I share some activities with you, I want to note that it's a tendency for teachers to want to correct our students. And it can be important during class to correct students, especially depending on the lesson, if that's part of your lesson, but not during the warm-up. The warm-up is not a place to correct our students. It's more a space to engage in that transition and get students warmed up for the class. So after the warm-up might be a better time for correcting our students, but making mistakes in the warm-up is all right. Correcting everything being perfect is not the purpose of the warm-up. Okay, so I have some activities for you some ideas to share with you, but I wonder if you can jump in the comments and let me know, do you engage your students in a warm-up in your classes already? Do you use a warm-up activity in the first 5 minutes? Is this something a practice that you employ already? I imagine that you have some sort of routine with your students where in those first few minutes you do something with them. So I'm curious, tell me in the comments, do you warm up your students in your classes? When I was teaching little students, I started teaching many years ago. I taught young students, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And my warm-up with those students was always physical. I would have students come into the class and shake their body and take some breaths before we sat down. Warm-ups can take lots of different forms depending on your students, what age they are or their ability, also who you are as a teacher. I see some in the comments. You start warm-ups with new topics. Some people, yes, you do use warm-ups. Oh, I'm glad. I'm curious, as I share some activities that I use to warm up my students, I would love if you would tell me in the comments if they are activities that you use too. Maybe you have modifications to share, so make sure you stay in that comment box as we're going through. Oh, Harriet uses TPR songs. Definitely. Warm-ups can be asking questions. Absolutely. Asking a simple question could be a starting warm-up for students any day of the week. Oh, I see, Ali, you say, I usually crack a joke or a quote or something from my favorite movies. Sure, that could be a great way to get your students into the class and focused on you, especially if they love jokes. Start warm-ups with questions or guessing. Definitely. They're a must in your classes. They flow smoothly when you warm up. I imagine your class flows smoothly after the warm-up because you gave some time for those students to get focused on your class. Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing what you do already. I'm going to share some activities and I'll describe the activity, how it works for you. And then you can let me know in the comments if you think that would work in your class. So here's the first one. The first activity for a warm-up I'll share with you is called charades. And maybe you've played charades in a variety of different ways. In the US, charades is sometimes a party game. Like when you have people over to your house for a party, it's a game that everyone of different ages can engage in. The idea with charades is that the targeted person is acting out a word or a phrase physically with their body without talking. So, for example, if in previous classes you've talked about active verbs, for example, I might have a bank of words like running, eating, dancing. I would give secretly one of those words to a student, and that student would, without talking, act out that active verb while the other students try and guess what they're doing, what the word is. I don't know in this picture that I have on the screen what his word is that he's acting out. What this is, I don't know. But it's a way to engage students physically, right? They're acting out with their body. Someone is getting up. It could be a way to set some expectations for what you're talking about that day, if it's a grammar point or a certain amount of vocabulary. And it can happen very fast. It takes just a few minutes to have a few students act out these charades, these sentences or words in a round from the class. I wonder, has anybody tried this with your students? Or if not with your students, have you tried it with your friends? Charades can be really fun to do with anybody. But for me, with students, it's a great way to get them engaged. Oh, I'm glad you've tried this one before. Oh, I see, Edison, you say there's a board game called Gestures. Yeah, it's the same idea as that game. You'll notice that charades engages the body and the voice of your students. So I'm going to share another option for a warm-up that engages our students in some writing. If you've joined previous RELO Andes webinars with me, you know that I love to teach writing. Writing can be really hard for our students to gather. It's usually the last language domain that they gain. So anytime that I can engage students in some low stakes writing, I'm trying to do it. So in this activity, I call it empty comics. In order to prepare for it, all you need to do is find a comic strip, just like this one that I have on the screen. Find a comic strip and wipe out the words from the bubbles. Then the students imagine, they might write, or maybe they orally respond if they're not ready for writing, what the comic characters are saying. This could take just about 5 minutes. So in this example, I might look at the first box of the comic, try and write or imagine what this little guy is saying and what his mom or babysitter or other guardian over here is saying. And we'll fill it in together or individually share out. Guessing is always engaging as a warm-up. Sure. I like to engage students in guessing or imagining something a little bit creative. And these empty comics is a great place to do it. Now, some people, when I've shared this before, have asked me, but Katie, where do I get some empty comics? And honestly, I make my own empty comics when I can't find them already empty. If you have a computer or if you're someone a little tech savvy, you might do this in an application like Paint, where you can remove the text. You could do this the non-tech way also if you have comics in your newspaper, for example, by just cutting out or covering up some of the words and giving your students the opportunity to fill it in themselves. Have you tried warming your students up with comics? Or maybe you've used comics in your class before. Imagination and creativity, absolutely. I think I might have shared the idea of empty comics a few months ago when we talked about creative writing and other writing activities. If you haven't tried it yet, this might be one to put on your list to try out. Students absolutely develop their imagination and creatively writing down phrases. Totally. Thanks for sharing. Okay. Are you ready for another activity? We've got 2 already. I'll share a third with you. This activity is called Finish the Thought. Some people call this a sentence starter. I like to call it finish the thought because I think about if I give a student the first part of a thought, they can finish it either by speaking it or writing it down. Usually I write a thought, a half of a thought, on a whiteboard or project it if you have that technology, and I ask students to complete it. So for example, I'll share on the board, today I'm happy about, and ask students to finish the thought. Usually I give an example. Today I'm happy about, for me today, I'm happy because I get to share some warm-up activities with teachers all over the world. What are you happy about? And students will respond either orally, maybe in partners, like a turn and talk, or they could do this in a journal. I saw someone mention an activity or a warm-up journal. This could be something that they write down and then share, depending on who your students are and their capacity to write. Any thought could be finished. So here's some other examples. Today, I want to learn about. By the time we finish today in the class, I want to have, or maybe I want to have learned, I want to have found, I want to have improved. I like to use this warm-up as a way to get feedback from students about the class and about their learning. So often I'll use this last one up there as an example that says, yesterday, I wish I had. That gives me some feedback about the class. Yesterday, I wish I had understood this grammar point better, or I wish I would have asked more specific questions, or I wish I had more time to work on this project, right? Any of these examples can work, or you can create your own. So in the comments, I'm curious, do you do this with your students? Do you warm them up with some finish the thoughts or sentence frames? Oh, Edison says you can start with the one love song I don't like, or the person I look up to is. Absolutely. When I'm teaching on themes, I use finish the thought on the theme. So for example, if we're in a unit all about, like Edison said, music, we could ask any series of thoughts about music. If we're learning about relationships, for example, I could have a finish the thought all about the people in my family are, for example. Finish the thought is something that doesn't take a lot of time to plan ahead. And I like those kind of activities in general, but especially for warm-ups. I don't want to spend a lot of time planning a warm-up. I want something I can plan for really quickly, knowing that my students will spend about 5 minutes on this activity. Okay, so we've got 3: charades, empty comics, finish the thought. Are you ready for a number 4, another activity you might try? Number 4 is just the simple stand up, breathe, and stretch. Now, when I've shared this with teachers before, they say, Katie, standing up and stretching does not engage our students' learning brains. And I think, I don't know. I think it does. Oxygenating the brain, so getting some oxygen to your brain, shaking off that tiredness from the morning, and performing the simple act of stretching does prepare our students' brains. This could be as simple as having students stand up, stretch their arms, reaching for the ceiling, turning left and right, maybe touch your toes, and then take a sequence of deep breaths. Breathing in and out together. I especially like to warm students up this way with deep breaths if I work in a school where students are moving quickly from one class to another, to another, to another. I taught in a high school where students only had 5 minutes to go from one class to the next. So when they were running to my class, they would get to the class all anxious and frantic. And so I'd have them come in, sit down, and breathe. And it really helped to warm students up for the day where they had a little bit of time to breathe and get ready. Even before this webinar right now, I took 3 deep breaths. It helped to calm my anxiety and get me ready to share this webinar with you. So it can be a really great warm-up for students and others alike. Have you tried this warm-up with your students? Do you give them time to breathe or to stretch or to stand up and stretch as they're getting into your classroom? If you haven't yet, I'd put it on your list to try and see how it affects your students if they come in feeling more focused because you gave them that space to stretch and to breathe. Oh, I see the comments. You've used it a lot with brain gym exercises. Definitely. Thanks for sharing. Some teachers that I've worked with in the past, they like to use a YouTube video. There are, oh my goodness, so many videos on the internet, not just on YouTube, but other places where you can have a guiding stretching activity for about 3 to 5 minutes. Oh, I saw that one, Herbert. I do it between lessons after I see they've had a long, tiring day. Yeah, absolutely. It's energizing to stretch our bodies, right? Energizers are great. Oh, it can help them also if they think the topic is boring. I think that's true too. They think the topic is boring, but they're getting a little energy from stretching. It can absolutely help them get ready for the class. Oh, I see Jorge says, taking advantage of the virtual environment, we can add relaxing music. Ooh, I love that idea. If you're teaching virtually, you might start your class with some relaxing music, give students a chance to come into the virtual space, breathe, relax before you transition after the warm-up. Totally. Okay, I think I have 2 more warm-up activities for you to try. So let's look at number 5. Number 5 is word association. In this activity, you provide an initial word, so the first word, and then each student takes that word in turns to say a word that they associate with the previous word. So they're making associations or connections. You can modify this word association activity for a lot of different types of students, situations in your class. Typically, I like to do this activity orally, and we do it like a whoop around from the class. So for example, I might start with a word that is related to some vocabulary that we have already worked on and taught in the past. In my example on the screen, it starts with banana. I'll say banana. The first student makes an association. Maybe she says monkey. The student next to her makes an association with monkey. Monkey, I think zoo. That third student goes to the next student. I think zoo, I think tourism. Tourism to travel. And we go all throughout the class making connections and associations from word to word to word to word. Now, if your students are capable of expressing themselves in English very well, maybe they're further along in their studies, you might challenge the student to justify their choice if the connection isn't obvious. So for example, from banana to monkey to zoo to tourist to travel, maybe the next student says airplane. That makes sense, travel, airplane, okay. The next student says rhinoceros. What? How are those associated? Airplane, rhinoceros? I think you need to justify your choice. So we could have a student explain why they chose that word when to the rest of us, it doesn't seem like it's associated. Now the student has to think, okay, I chose the word rhinoceros after the word airplane because my last vacation, I went to a zoo that had a rhinoceros and we got there on an airplane. So it creates a space where the students can associate words, but also we could take it to the next level where they have to justify their choice of words. Have you tried this with your students? I see Edison in the comments says, use it for verbs like traveling or maybe topics like sports. Absolutely. We could start with any word that's something that our students already know. I wouldn't use this activity to teach new words because if the students don't know the word that you're starting with, they're not going to have anywhere to go, right? We would use this for vocabulary that we've already taught and worked on. I see some associations in the comments. Eggs, omelet, breakfast, morning, school. Absolutely, that's how it would go. If you put a time limit on this, so it feels more like a game, that also makes it a little exciting. So a student only has a short number of seconds to make a word association before it moves to the next student. I'm glad to see you all are resonating with this word association in the comments box. Okay, that was my activity number 5, and I have one more to share with you. Number 6 is called telephone. Telephone is a game that has been around maybe even before telephones were invented. I don't know, a very, very long time. Telephone is a game that I played when I was a kid. Maybe you played it when you were a kid too. But now I use it as a warm-up for classes of all different levels and all different ages of students. So for telephone, usually I divide my class into 2 different teams. I'll take a sentence from a previous lesson, so maybe something we worked on yesterday using some grammar from yesterday. Whisper that sentence into the ear of the first person in each line. And that student then turns to the student next to them and whispers the sentence that they heard all the way down the line from one to the next to the next. The last student in the line says out loud what he or she heard. And we determine if the sentences have changed from the first person to the last person. Maybe the sentences don't make sense. They have mistakes or grammar mistakes. Maybe the vocabulary has changed from what a student hears to what they whisper to the next student. You could do this with 2 teams or maybe just with one class. You could do this with writing instead of whispering. I had someone suggest folding a paper. So you fold the paper so you can only see what the one person before you had written, similar to the whispers. This is just a fun way to engage students in some team cooperation. Students are working together to try and pass the message accurately from what they heard to what they're whispering. But usually, no matter how much effort they put into it, there will be some sort of mistake at the end of the telephone line. So I wonder, have you tried this activity with your students? Or have you tried it with your friends? Maybe you did this when you were coming up in school as well. Oh, I see the idea of starting reported speech as well. Absolutely, totally. You call this reported speech as well. Magali does, yeah. I like this activity for students who are learning phonics. So when young students are learning to read, or even students who know how to read in their primary language, but they're learning to read in a second language, sometimes it can be difficult to get the pronunciation or the phonics of the words that they're learning. So telephone can be a way to work on pronunciation as well, to articulate the speech that you hear with your voice accurately so that the person who you're whispering to understands, right? Oh, I see. Some people have used this. You think it's lots of fun? Oh, I'm glad. Oh, you've used it during English club activities. Totally, you could use it in English club. I like to use it as a warm-up, but it could be at any point, right? You could modify this activity for different contexts. Maybe for a challenge to improve pronunciation. Great idea. I might challenge students to be very careful about how they're pronouncing the words that we're passing so that the words don't get confusing. Oh, you could potentially use it for memorizing as well. That's a great idea. Maybe they have to memorize the sentence before they pass it along. Oh man, yeah, Andrea, I hear you about virtual lessons. If you're doing this virtually, doesn't work the same. How could we modify it virtually? I might have to modify it virtually to be something that happens in the chat box, but then it might be more of a word association. Lots of great ideas shared. Okay, so we've gone through 6 different activities. We've got telephone, the word association, counting backwards, stand up, breathe, and stretch, finish the thought, empty comics, and charades. So tell me in the comments, which one of these activities are you going to try? Which one is interesting to you that you think, ooh, I could plan for this in my virtual or my in-person class, and I'm gonna try it out? Which one do you think? Will you try charades or empty comics? Finish the thought, stand up, breathe, and stretch. That's the one I need to do for myself more often. Word association, maybe, or telephone. Let me know, which one do you think you're gonna try? As you're jumping in the comments with the one that stands out to you, I want to let you know that next month we will have another webinar on the 3rd Thursday in September at 2 p.m. Lima time. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. And in the meantime, while you mark your calendars, I'm going to keep my eye on the comments and see what you're going to try out. I see a lot of word association, comics and telephone, comics and word association, telephone, finish the thought. I love that one too. A couple finish the thoughts in the comments. I'm going to do the empty comics. Definitely. Word association. I can tell you I'll like that one. Me too. Telephone and word association, charades. Absolutely. Well, if you are interested in asking me questions about these warm-ups, or maybe you'd like to plan a lesson with these warm-ups together, give me some of your ideas and questions. Tomorrow, we'll have the post-webinar discussion. This is a time for you to join a Zoom meeting with me and tell me about your ideas of how to use these warm-up activities, and we can work together to problem solve any issues you might see, especially those of you that are still virtual. If you're still teaching virtually, join tomorrow. Let's talk about that and see if we can come up with some modifications for these activities that could work virtually. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, this evening, this morning, if wherever you are in the world. I'm always happy to share some ideas and to see your ideas in the comments as well. I hope to see you tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, I'll see you next month for the next RELO Andes webinar. Thanks so much. See you then.